what's my goal in terms of having the U.S. economy better, not tomorrow? I don't care what the stock market looks right now. Where is it going to be 5 years from now? If I'm thinking about an issue like climate change, I know I can't solve all of climate change this week, but what steps can I take? Allows money to go into risky but promising new ideas that we drew up. Now, that's what I've heard. You know, I'm not suggesting I have access to intelligence that guarantees that's true, but that's an example of, you know, we have to be more nimble as democracies. We have to move faster and more creatively around some of these problems, because those countries that are not democratic, oftentimes they can take information like that and they can move fast. Partly because they're unconstrained by public opinion and the press and oversight and transparency and things like that.
Changing a little bit of subject and thinking about your experience about Silicon Valley and how you saw them growing, what do you think?
Sometimes, you know, when I think about my campaigns, I did learn a lot from the one political campaign that I lost, but I learned a lot when I won.
Of course.
And it was fine. So, look, we all, I think, you know, worry about failure. It's a natural human impulse. But you can create at least a business and commercial and social atmosphere in which failure and taking risks on big significant bets, big significant ventures.
Here in Spain we say like once per day a glass of wine is fine.
No.
So you should try that.
Then I fall asleep too early and I still had a lot of paperwork that I still had to do.
Okay, you know that this week we are here to discuss how is impacting digitization and technology to our society, to organizations. How have you seen the growth during these past years? How has been the impact into organizations and to our societies? How did we change? And what do you think about the digitization of our economy? What should we do about it?
Well, look, I've been thinking about this. This is a useful perspective. That when I was elected president in 2008, the smartphone didn't exist, or it hadn't been marketed. I mean, maybe Steve Jobs had one, but nobody else did. We've only had the smartphone for 12 years, right? And when you think about the transformation, the ubiquity, if I go to the smallest village in Africa or Asia or Latin America, everybody has one, just in the span of a decade. And we have never seen, we've seen enormous technological change in the past. What we've never seen is technological change adapted this widely, this quickly. And now, the transformations, I think everybody's familiar, globalization, the global supply chain, the ability for companies to instantaneously communicate, having a truly global financial market, all those things are relatively recent developments. They have created enormous opportunities for wealth creation. They have created enormous opportunities for us to carry around more information in our pockets than once existed in every library and university in the world for most of human history. And that's an enormous benefit. It's created efficiencies and wealth. What we are also seeing is that our political, social, cultural institutions have not caught up with the technology. So social media is one of the best examples. in which we now have this globally connected world, and yet the information that flows through it can be toxic, it can be destructive, it can be used to recruit terrorists, it can be used to bully people. Our children are being impacted in many ways that we do not yet understand with respect to their mental health. It is now a huge force in terms of misinformation. So I think that the challenge, and by the way, it's going to accelerate. Many of you are aware of the fact that, for example, as AI comes on board, as you start seeing supercomputers combined with AI, the speed at which we are going to be able to construct and deconstruct reality, the difficulty of us distinguishing what is true and what is fabricated is going to become more and more difficult. And we're going to have to do a better job of adapting our institutions so that we can harness the benefits of technology and mitigate the harms. And we're not yet doing that. The same is true, by the way, for the economy. As many people know, I came in during the 2008 financial crisis. We came very close to the entire financial system melting down. And we had to make a series of very big decisions quickly. But the frequency of financial crisis and the power of those financial crises is increasing, not just arithmetically, but exponentially, because everything's connected. So if there's a currency crisis in Thailand, suddenly it has massive ramifications here in Spain and with the euro. And you think about during the Greek financial crisis. I mean, Greece is a small economy. In most of modern history, if Greece defaulted, it would be obviously very painful for the people of Greece. It might have some impact in terms of trade. Spanish businesses might be able to have to sell less to Greece. But when now Greece is part of the euro, and the euro in turn is part of the global financial system, and there's a bunch of sovereign debt that's being carried by banks on Wall Street, now all those things can create a cascading effect. And again, that's an example in which we have not created international regulatory frameworks or oversight to match the full instantaneous globalization of the financial systems. And I think that this is where we're at a disadvantage compared to the industrial age, where the Industrial Revolution took 200 years, and so you've got time to be able to adapt new laws, new government systems, new cultural practices and norms to manage it.
Do you think the increasingly nationalistic and multipolar world that is happening right now makes it more complex for businesses to navigate? What do you think that are the greatest challenges that we are facing today in Europe? And do you think we have the ability to solve them?
Well, the answer, look, I am an optimist, right? I ran my campaign on hope.
Yeah.
Hope and change. So I will always think that we have the capacity to solve these problems. Before I came to Spain, I was in Copenhagen. The former NATO Secretary, Rasmussen, was hosting a democracy summit. And so I spoke there, and obviously Ukraine was on everybody's mind. I think it's important to acknowledge how much solidarity all of Europe, including Spain, has shown, because there's been a recognition that what Russia is doing and what Putin is doing is a threat to the democratic project in Europe as a whole. But I was trying to describe how a complacency, I think, had set in about democracy before Ukraine. You know, I'm old enough to remember the Berlin Wall falling, finally coming down, and what the Cold War meant. And my grandfather fought in World War II. But generations have maybe forgotten and started to take for granted the peace and prosperity that a unified Europe provided. So Ukraine has become a wake-up call. And part of the point that I tried to make is that what Putin is doing with an authoritarian regime reverting back to a mindset that says big countries can impose their will on small countries and ignore rule of law, that's connected to Le Pen in France, that's connected to some of the trends that we see in terms of far-right populism, the undermining of democratic norms and practices. And I think it is very important, even as we show solidarity with Ukraine and condemn what's happening in Russia, we have to look to ourselves and ask ourselves, are we in fact doing everything that's required to strengthen our democracies here? And in order to win this contest of ideas between democracy and authoritarianism, I think we have to look at, do we have an inclusive capitalism that reduces inequality? Because some of populism arises when people feel as if no matter how hard they work, they're not going to have the same opportunities as people at the top. I think we have to tell a better story about how we can have solidarity inside of our own countries or within Europe, but still have a sense of national identity and purpose. Because I think sometimes there's a what I call a Davos mentality, which says, nations don't matter, cultures don't matter, but in fact, people feel the need to belong to something. And the question is, can we create a sense of belonging to people that doesn't require us then to also make enemies? Can we affirm our own culture without pushing other people aside? And I think in Europe, that is possible, but I think more work needs to be done. And look, when you think about Spain, right? Within the national borders of Spain, there have been some times where it broke out into close to civil war. And the history of conflict based on identity in this country, that's very recent. I mean, that's within recent memory. You think about the bombings of the train station. That was just a few years ago. And that, so we have to constantly work and be on guard and be sensitive to how do we balance organizing ourselves so that we can meet larger goals and larger threats and bigger challenges, but still think at a local level and still think at a regional level and affirm people's sense of identity and language and culture and food. That's I think a big challenge, and I think probably sometimes in Europe there have been times where some of those trends have been ignored, and that's a lesson we need to learn.
Okay. Changing a little bit of the subject, we know during the COP21 in Paris, you played a critical role getting large countries to join new protocols to reduce CO2 emissions. In a highly consumerist society like it is today, how do we reduce climate change? We know that this is a great challenge for institutions, for companies, even is demanded for our society. What steps do you think that European organizations specifically can do to contribute towards a real climate change, but also a more sustainable world with a better social impact?
Well, first of all, I hear it's very hot in Madrid right now, and that's coming earlier. And you know, we can joke about it, but I suspect that we're already seeing climate impacts in terms of agriculture here in Spain, just like agriculture in the United States. I think there's some fairly strong evidence that some of the migration crises that we're seeing around the world is being spurred on because of shifting climates. If you get a drought in an area where you still have a lot of subsistence farming, you know, people may have no choice but to leave the land, and suddenly they're moving into new areas. There's scarcity, there's conflict. You know, when we talk about climate change, we talk oftentimes about the cost of us adapting, changing, moving to clean energy. But what we don't always talk about is the cost that we're already starting to see in terms of affecting our economies, our peoples now. This is not something far away. This is happening as we speak.
And is it profitable? Because sometimes they will think about that.
Well, look, if I were an entrepreneur right now, I would make a big investment in clean energy, because, you know, human beings, usually we figure out that we need to do something, but we're procrastinators. It takes us a long time to get there. We will have no choice but to transition. It's going to happen. And the pressure on us transitioning is going to just accelerate. And so, you know, any good entrepreneur knows it's better being in on the ground floor rather than waiting for somebody else to do it. And I think there's enormous opportunity and profitability from shifting from a dirty fuel economy to a clean energy economy. The question is, can we put in, can government put in some incentive structures to encourage that transition a little bit quicker? You know, so one of the things I tried to do was to create a national price for carbon, a market price, so that companies had an incentive. They would have to pay more if they polluted more. They would save tax money or other incentives for them to move into clean energy. One of the things I did very early on when I came into office was we passed laws to accelerate and to save, frankly, the solar and the wind industry that was on the verge of collapse during the financial crisis. Because we did that, it actually took off, and the price of wind and carbon, or wind and solar, has gone down faster than even I expected at the time. And the difference in price between solar and wind generated energy and gas or coal or oil, it continues to shrink. So there's huge potential. We could be doing even more, but that's going to require us to give more incentives for companies that are doing the right thing and taking away incentives for companies that are doing the wrong thing. In the United States, we still have subsidies for oil companies. Now, the truth is, ExxonMobil does not need subsidies from me. They're making a lot of profit on their own. What we need to subsidize is new energy. So I think that is a huge opportunity. If I were in the tech sector, I would also be thinking about how do we take existing technologies and apply them to new industries. So, you know, I was mentioning AI earlier. One of the great promises of AI is they can adapt and calculate systems to, for example, figure out how you optimize energy efficiency in buildings much faster than any engineer could, and they can do it on a constant basis. So that a plant or a facility, an industrial facility, they could save 10, 15, 20% on their heating and energy bills just because the computer's constantly calculating in ways that sometimes we can't predict what are the best pathways to do that. So that's an example of where there are opportunities for entrepreneurs, not just to create new energy sources, but to take the combination of science and digital learning and transform so much risk-taking in the sense that whenever we're in a cycle of tech boom, things get funded that I'm not sure if you looked on paper, you'd say, that's not such a great idea. That's how somebody like the person who started WeWorks ended up getting billions of dollars for what's not clear was such a great business concept. The woman at Theranos, who started this blood technology, and it turned out it was fraudulent. But everybody was eager to get in on the next thing. So this is always a balance, but that is part of a culture. You have to be willing to accept a little bit of additional risk and failure in order to get the big hits that I think catapult an economy into becoming a tech driver.
We certainly will take some risks, and we are about to arrive into the end. We certainly know that next to a great leader, there is a great partner. In your case, you always recognize Michelle's work, inspiring every action you've been taking. We understand you are both really focused now on your foundation. Can you share a bit about your goals on the foundation, both short and long term?
So, right before we left the White House, Michelle and I asked ourselves, what is it that we can do? Because we were still relatively young, and she's younger than me, as she reminds me. And so the question was, for the next 10, 15, 20 years, how can we make the greatest contribution? And there are many specific issues we care about: climate change, economic justice, racial equality. But the one thing I had learned, and I think she agreed, was that the single most important thing we can probably do is to encourage the next generation of leadership. I have traveled all around the world, and everywhere I go, what I find is that you have amazing young people in their 20s and their 30s who are making a difference. They are educating young people in poor communities. They are starting, companies that are shifting to green energy. They are working to resolve conflicts in communities that have been torn apart because of religious differences or ethnic differences. But the problem is that they're not getting as much encouragement and support as they need. And so the real focus of our foundation is to find the young leaders in every country, on every continent, and to say, we are here to help you.
We are here.
And more than that, we want to bring you together with other young leaders who are doing work like you are doing. And so, for example, here in Europe, while I was in Copenhagen, we had a gathering of 100 of the top young leaders around Europe. Some of them are in the European Parliament. Some are small mayors, or mayors of small towns in Italy. Some are tech entrepreneurs who are focused on how do we spread digital literacy among young people. Some are folks who are working on how do we develop compassionate immigration policies. Some are working on making sure that gay and lesbian people are not discriminated against. So they have now become not just part of our network, but they now support each other. So, for example, when the Ukraine war happened, we had leaders in Ukraine that were communicating with leaders in Germany and Romania to help them escape the war. And they're now mobilizing in Poland and Germany in order to help create platforms to feed and house all the migrants who are coming in. They're sharing ideas. They're now meeting with leaders in Africa or in Southeast Asia about how can you join climate change activism here in Europe with what's happening in Asia or Latin America. And so that is really our primary focus. And you know, one of the great things about that focus is that when you spend time with these young people, they will make you feel more hopeful about the future. Because the generation that's coming up behind us, they are better educated, they are more innovative, they are idealistic, they are more comfortable with diversity, different people coming from different backgrounds and what you can learn from each other. And so we want to make sure that we are giving them the help and assistance they need so that they can take the baton and start running the race.
Exactly.
And that's part of, I think, our job as those of us who already benefited from being in power. One of the most important things we can do is to think about our succession. If you are in a company, and you should already be thinking, who are the people who eventually will take your place? And encouraging and giving them power and responsibility and mentoring and support. And what is true in a business is also true for governments, and true for countries, and true for civic organizations. Because none of the problems that we're talking about are going to be solved in our lifetime. I mean, I occupied what many consider to be the most powerful office on earth for 8 years. And 8 years goes by very quickly. And if you're talking about climate change, if you're talking about how do you deal with religious conflict, if you're talking about how do you bring peace to the Middle East, if you're talking about what to do about nuclear weapons, 8 years it goes like that. And so our job is to make sure that we can sustain our efforts over time. And that means bringing the next generation of young people along. And they're ready, by the way, and eager to take on more responsibility if we will share it with them.
Okay, I would like to end up. I took your word that I knew that you really pretty much like Spain. When is your next visit going to be with Michelle and maybe your daughters?
Well, Michelle, she comes in here on her own without me.
Really?
She stays with the ambassador. I won't say where. She drinks a lot of wine.
She's very jealous now, right?
She's like out on boats and she's sunning herself. I'm back home working, missing her. So she may come in and out without letting me know or letting you know. I hope to come here as often as possible. I think that the culture of Spain is unique, but it is also one that I think welcomes people. And it is, it's one that maybe because Also, I come from a warm climate, so I always feel kind of at home. I'm never too cold when I'm here. But I always feel the graciousness of the Spanish people, and the hospitality, and I think that is one of your country's great gifts, and it should continue to be advertised and encouraged, because very rarely do I meet somebody who says, I went to Spain, it's no fun. I don't meet those people very often. Usually people come here, they want to come back.
Will you plan maybe in the future to retire in Spain?
What's that?
To retire? Will you retire here?
Well, I will say this, I was born in Hawaii, that's nice too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hope you enjoyed the time with us, and we take your work, and we're looking forward to receiving you with Michelle here in Spain, and I hope you enjoy your days here as well. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Yeah.